you might have that child who's really easy, who sits really still in church, who does all their homework and gets A's, and they get out on their own and they can't function because it's analogous to, tilling a field and planting corn year over year. It's not ready to be left on its own. It's worse off than where it started.
Welcome back to Collapse Life. I'm your host, Zara Sethna. It is great to have you with us as we kick off 2025. People often make resolutions to start the year, and given the incredible uncertainty we face here in America and more generally around the world in the year ahead, preparing for hard times might be the wisest resolution yet. Our guest today is someone who has made a business of helping others take practical steps towards greater resilience and independence. Ryan Steva is known as the Homestead Consultant, and he joins us from his farm in Tennessee. Today, we'll be talking about what led Ryan to the homesteading lifestyle, what he's learned from his own experience, and from teaching others. With any luck, there'll be lots of tips and tricks we can all pick up along the way. Welcome, Ryan. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on, Sarah.
That's great. I also want to make sure that we both send a shout out and a thanks to Aaron Clary for this introduction. He was on the podcast late last year and he recommended you and thought you would be a great guest on this podcast. So we're really
Yeah,
thankful for that.
very appreciative for that. And there's a fun story behind how I met him if you want me to tell it at some point on the show here.
Yeah, we'd love to hear that.
Sure.
We'd love to hear a little bit more about you. So maybe we can start with I know that you faced a health crisis in your 20s, and that was kind of a motivator for you to transform your lifestyle. And it's kind of what led you to the homesteading that you do today. So maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and what happened.
Absolutely. So when I was in my mid 20s, or yeah, about mid 20s, I was on vacation in Florida, and I ended up waking up in the morning to pick up the phone and not being able to get up. So I actually was able to kind of roll out of bed, and I was on the floor. I couldn't move a muscle. Like, I couldn't lift my arms. I couldn't do anything. I could barely even speak. And so when I got to the hospital, they really didn't have any answers. I slowly recovered and eventually went home. And at the time, home was Minnesota. And so I could get to the Mayo pretty easily, but it took some time to get in, about 9 months. So while I was waiting, I actually started doing some internet research, which I know we're told is not a safe thing to do by some media outlets. But I started doing that nonetheless, and I learned basically how to cure the supposedly incurable disease that I had, basically just with diet and nutrition. And it made a huge difference. I was probably 90% of the way fully better, and I had felt better than I had ever felt in my entire life.
Wow.
And so by the time I got to the Mayo Clinic, I had really recovered significantly. I had figured out what was going on to my body, and then I was able to address those issues dietarily. And so at the Mayo, I started talking to the foremost leading expert in the condition that I had, and I realized that the information that he was giving me would probably make me feel better for a few months, but have a precipitous downturn over time that would probably end up leaving me in a wheelchair for the rest of my life.
Wow.
So there was this big, like light bulb that went on of this system is really broken. Like, the leading expert in the world at the most prestigious medical institution in the world just gave me information about what to do about my condition that would literally leave me in a wheelchair for my, like, wheelchair bound for the rest of my life, and a much shorter life at that. It really got me, it really opened the rabbit hole of what else is broken.
Yeah.
So I knew our food systems were broken, at least to an extent, at least how we were being told to eat. I really had not gotten into realizing how bad and poisonous much of our food was at that point, but I had realized that, the high carb diet was that we eat as Americans, and just in general, was not beneficial.
Mm.
So that was really what opened the door. And then I tried my own garden, which my first garden was an absolute failure, and we all need to make those failures to figure out how to do things right. And shortly after that, we moved from Minnesota to Tennessee, and I really just started homesteading. We looked for a place where we had some space to grow food and raise some animals, and that's what we've been doing ever since. And just diving further into that rabbit hole, and helping other people kind of escape these systems of control and systems of unhealth.
Amazing. Um, if you don't mind my asking, can you actually tell me of the condition that you had?
Yeah, it's called hypokalemic periodic paralysis. It's considered a genetic condition, which obviously I have to be careful about what I say about medical information, but I don't believe it to be a genetic condition. I believe it to be a mineral deficiency of a
Mm,
few key nutrients,
wow.
as well as a few other things going on too. But it's probably pretty closely linked to type 2 diabetes in that it's a cell wall absorption issue, or an
Mhm.
issue with being able to get certain nutrients, or having the nutrients that are needed to get certain things through the cell wall.
Interesting.
Yep.
So was your dietary change mostly removing things from your diet or adding in things that weren't there?
It was mostly, at the time, it was removing things. So it was removing a lot of the carbohydrates. So
Uh-huh.
sugars, breads, things like that. I really went towards, at the time, it wasn't really paleo, but it was much more protein based.
And then again, um, sort of that's what led you to wanting to have more control over the inputs that are going into your body. Yeah. So
Yes.
growing your own food or raising your own animals so that you can really be sure about, because even if you decide to go for a mostly protein diet, if you get that from the store, there's still a lot of question marks over that. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And that was, of course, over time, because it was like I didn't realize my first realization was how broken our medical system was.
Mm.
My second realization was how broken our food systems were. And that, one led to the other. And then, eventually it leads you to realizing how broken our social systems are, how broken our financial systems are. So, yes, it wasn't that I realized how poisonous most of our food was right away, but more that I realized that I did want to start producing some of my own and providing some of my own, thinking that it might be a bit more healthy, a bit more nutrient dense, but not realizing exactly how much more it would be.
Did you jump in with both feet into homesteading, or did you kind of slowly? I know you mentioned you started a garden, it was a disaster. Were you doing that while doing a full time job and raising a family, or did you sort of like slowly walk your way into it? Or I know a lot of people
Yeah.
just dive in head first.
Yeah. In fact, that's one of the things with consulting that I've been really careful about teaching people is, for me, I started slowly, intentionally, and I still don't have nearly as much as I'd like to, or I'm not doing as much as I'd like to, because I don't want to create a situation where we burn out and feel like we have to go back to something that we don't want to do, or take steps backwards. So personally, I actually, on my actual property, I only have a garden, chickens, a couple of orchards, and then I also raise meat chickens. But we really keep it fairly scaled back, because it's been really important to me, running a full-time job, having my wife be a stay-at-home mom with the kids, doing homeschool. If we took on too much, we could really hit burnout fast, and so we've been really careful about that. And I try to talk with other people about being careful as well, because I've seen, especially in Tennessee, where so many people come to homestead. I've seen so many people come out, buy a big property, get all the animals, and lose a lot of money, lose a lot of time, and then just kind of go back to life as usual because it's too much work.
When did you decide to turn your experience into a consultancy, and what's your mission around that?
Yeah, great question. I was helping friends and family set up gardens, set up chickens. I had a couple of people I helped set up farms, and really it was this weird interim time, because I had lost like two jobs right in a row, And I had started my own company actually as a home inspector, and I was doing that, but I was still getting my business off the ground. And so I had these slow periods where I was just trying to find things to do. So I was helping friends and family set all these systems up, realized that it was going so much better than I was seeing, you know, other people who were just kind of winging it. And I realized that what I was doing was actually a valuable service in helping people. I had a couple different friends who had kind of mentioned how helpful it had been. And so I realized, well, I'm part of kind of a decent sized community in Tennessee who does homesteading and kind of is into preparedness and resilience. I could start helping people on projects and make a business out of it. And so I did. And a big part of that, a big part of why I'm doing that is because I want to see my community be more resilient, to be more connected, and be more connected back with the soil, with the things that, the things that we traditionally would have been connected with. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's really my goal, is to help communities become more resilient. And part of how I do that is just helping one homestead at a time, and then helping in my local region, helping connect those people, because different people are going to have different skill sets. We can't all do everything.
Yeah. What kinds of people are your clients? Who are you seeing kind of moving into this homesteading movement?
It's a really vast and diverse group of people, to be honest. You name the person, you name the political persuasion. Um, there, I I think just about every type of person you can think of in various different ways have been people that I've helped. But each person or each family is going to have a given goal or a given thing that they're moving towards and really desiring to uh, meet. And so that might be resilience in protection or in safe, like physical safety. It might be
Mm-hmm.
resilience in food, resilience in water, whatever it is. And so there's all these different people coming from all these different walks of life who are starting, and they come, for me and for a lot of people, it's, you have a health crisis and you start to see how broken the system is. But for some people, it's, they were in corporate America and started to see how corrupt it is,
Mm-hmm.
or in politics or whatever else. So yeah, there's all kinds of people coming from all kinds of different places and starting to work together, even though they might have differences in where they came from initially.
Has most of your consulting business been local to you in Tennessee?
Primarily, I do some phone call consults or video consults. I'm actually happy to travel, but most of what I do is local.
Hmm. And when you start with a client, are there sort of three or four general areas that you focus on, or is it sort of soup to nuts? What would you say characterizes kind of the commonalities of the consulting?
Sure. Well, I do have a little bit of a formula in that I have a questionnaire that I send out to anybody who's wanting to work with me. And that questionnaire is, um, how in like an IQ test or some other test, there's these questions that almost don't seem to relate to the thing that you're getting at. Well, I most of my questions do relate, but I have questions set up in a really specific way so that I can kind of see how people answer them and
Mm.
get a real feel, an overall feel for what their goals are and what their concerns are and what some of the things they may not know are as well. And so, one of the biggest things that I want to do is really narrow down on the goals that they have as as an individual, as a family, so that when I talk with them, when I do what I call the initial on-site consult, I'm getting, I'm both giving them the best information I can and ready to ask the pertinent questions to start pointing them in the right direction. So, generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, I'm going to start with a on site consultation after reviewing the questionnaire that I send out. And for most people, that gets them enough on the right track to just start going, at least for a few years, to get the basic systems in place for the things that are most important for them.
Mhm.
And then after that, I can do additional consultations, such as putting together designs for their property or putting together a step by step process. Of course, those are going to cost more, but like I said, generally that first consultation gets people far enough in the right direction that's enough, at least for a few years for them.
Got it. So generally, it's after somebody has already bought a property and moved in that they're coming to you and saying, "All right, where do I start?" Or "I've already done these few things. What do I do next? How do I kind of maximize my gains?" Do you ever start your consultation process even earlier than that? Like even when someone is still looking for a place to move, do you ever consult in that reign?
I do actually. That was the basis of starting my business. Was I had some now very good friends who were moving from New Jersey, and they were working with a real estate agent to try to find a place. And
Mhm.
so we went out to a handful of different places while they were looking. It's not a typical thing that I do, but I'm happy to. And it
Mhm.
was actually really good to be able to do that. I think that both of them not having had any homesteading experience likely would have bought a property that would be very difficult to manage. The first one that we looked at, that I think they were kind of on the verge of purchasing, had some major water issues. It was right in a valley, but somebody who doesn't live in Tennessee and doesn't know the kind of rains that we get and the kind of accumulation of water that we get wouldn't necessarily know that that could be such an issue.
Right.
And there was some other things with that specific property, but yeah, I've helped people do that. I also have done kind of a continuing course with a realtor in the area because we try to teach people who are moving to this area one things to look for because it's different, but also just generally what you want to look for with a homestead, how to set goals, how to go through all of those things. So we maybe quarterly or so we'll put on a live teaching opportunity for people to actually come and see it. We call it Homestead Land Buying 101. And so we kind of go
Mhm.
through all the different pros and cons of, set your goals. And then once you've set your goals, what do you need to do to, or what are the things you should be looking for in the property to meet them?
That's great. And if you don't mind, maybe since I have you, I'll pick your brain a bit
Sure.
um, on that. First of all, there are probably people right now who are thinking, "I would love to move somewhere and start homesteading. Is it too late?" We're at a moment where things are changing very rapidly.
Hmm.
Most of the people who are watching Collapse Life probably understand where we're at, but if you haven't already started, um, there could be a real anxiety that, like, how can I get it all done? And we may be facing some sort of crisis in the next few months. So question number
Sure.
one, is it too late to get started? And then I guess the follow on is, I mean, obviously, a lot of people would love to move to a place like where you are in Tennessee. You probably don't want everybody moving to Tennessee, and it isn't going to be possible for everybody. So, um, if you have to look kind of where you are,
Hmm.
which may be totally different parts of the country, what are the general things that people should be looking for? If the answer to the first question, is it too late, is no, what should people be looking for?
Yeah, I would say it's never too late. You really should get started on what you want to pursue as soon as viably possible. With homesteading, what I like to tell people is you're going to make mistakes, so make them as soon as you can. If you're wanting to start getting into homesteading, even if you're in an apartment, I don't know, start making milk kefir or start making sourdough bread or growing hydroponic lettuce. So the thing is that you need to start to understand how systems work. One way that I like to put it is, getting your hands dirty and learning how or interacting with the physical world, because we don't do that. Like nobody does that anymore. And so we have this huge disconnect, especially people my age and younger. You've got the millennials, Gen Z, who don't go outside, so they don't know, they don't know if you put your foot too far out on a branch, it's going to break while you climb a tree, right? And so these little simple things that our brain should naturally understand, we don't know. And by doing little steps right now, like when I grew my terrible little garden on my back patio, I learned something from that. I failed and I realized that I needed to know a lot more about gardening before I continued to do anything more, or it would be useless.
Hmm.
And so I'd say start now where you are with what you have, and then start looking for properties. And the things you're going to be looking for are going to be really based around your goals. And so think about what is important to you. Are you most concerned about physical safety and being able to protect your property? And if you are, maybe think a little bit deeper about that, because you might be overly concerned about that and you might be putting yourself, say, on a property that's an hour and a half away from a hardware store. And the next time you have to do a plumbing project, it's 3 hours of driving just to pick up one part. And when you
Mm.
realize that you got the wrong part, now it's 6 hours of driving in one day. And how far away are you from these amenities or these things that are going to help you get out of, get more resilient and out of that kind of controlled system? So I still need to go to Home Depot. Everybody I know needs to go to, Home Depot or Lowe's or your local hardware store to get parts to live the life that we live.
Right.
And we can get more and more disconnected from the need for those things. But realistically, because of how we've grown up, because of where we're at, it's not like you're just going to step out onto a property and it's going to be a little house on the prairie and you don't have to go to town anymore. So don't pick a place that's too far out. Don't pick a place that's too isolated. You really do still need community. And that's another thing, is find community, find others, like mutual assistance groups or other groups that will work with you and are going towards the same thing. So you're going to find others who, well, a good example is one of the homesteading groups in our area did a sheep slaughter and processing workshop. So there's no cost to it. It's just somebody who wanted to do it. There's somebody else in the community who knew how to. So people brought all their shared skills and resources together and they learned something together. And so those things are really, really important. And if you're too
Hmm.
isolated, that doesn't work. Um, yeah, I'd say think about the natural resources that are around a home that you're looking at. So you'll want to make sure that you have some place to actually grow things, place to actually to raise animals if that's what you want. Think about the resources you're going to have. Woods are a big resource if you want to burn wood for heat or other fuel. Water is a huge one. Trying to find a place that has a well or a spring or some other type of water source, so that if city water gets shut off, you still have some way of getting that.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is so much to consider, and so much of that has to do with what are you really trying to aim towards? What is your most what are your most important goals, and how do you balance all those things out with modern conveniences and things you actually need to access? Because you're not going to get rid of the grocery store entirely. It at least not for a very long time, and even if you do, you're going to have a really boring diet. Um, so I'd say consider all those things and don't get too romantic about the idea of living off grid out where nobody else is.
Right. So the idea of homesteading is sort of being reinterpreted or redefined so that you can homestead wherever you are. As
Mm-hmm.
you said, like you may live in an apartment in a city, but you can still do a few things that are in the homesteading path
Yep.
that still build your own resilience. They start building your confidence and you being able to do things for yourself, and then you take baby steps towards that full self-sufficiency.
Yeah. I mean, just like good financial advice would be to take your time, do small steps, pay off debt, do the things that aren't necessarily a ton of fun in small ways towards, rather than buying a lottery ticket hoping that you'll someday win the lottery and then you go broke anyways because you don't know how to manage your money. Homesteading's much the same way, where you need to take those small steps and learn the intricacies of how to do different things and what works and what doesn't when you're interacting with the natural world, so that um, eventually you become much more independent and much more resilient. But yeah, you can't. It's really, I have not yet seen anybody who just took a giant leap without having some background and some experience in homesteading, farming, who actually succeeded. Everybody who I've seen do that has either burnt out or lost all of their money and had to quit.
Yeah. The cost aspect is something that I wanted to ask you about because as I'm listening to you, it sounds, I think, to a lot of people like this can be expensive. You have to buy
Mm-hmm.
the property. You probably have to renovate an old farmhouse. You may have to drill a well. You're going to have to put in swales. You're going to have to, build maybe outbuildings. All of this starts to add up. So, um, while you may be able to take yourself out of certain systems, so there's a cost savings, there's also going to be some upfront costs. So talk a little bit about how you kind of coach your clients through that and what that's been like for you as well.
Sure. Well, again, that's part of why I've started slow and gone slow, because one income household is not, our society is not designed for that. And so I've taken the time to go slow. I have a friend, Matt Hundley, who has written a book called Scrapsteading, and it really addresses that issue where you can build basically an entire homestead off of just scraps that you can get in various different places. And that's pretty insightful and helpful. But I tend to like to be more in between the spend a lot of money and scrap steading side, where of course it depends on each individual person, but you can do things in a way that is good enough, which some people hate, but getting overly perfect about every last thing on your homestead will kind of end up driving you mad.
Hmm.
And so there's some compromises that have to be made. And a big part of keeping your finances in check on the homestead is figuring out how to make the correct compromises. So rather than, or, not getting stuck on not doing something because you can't do it perfect.
Right.
So part of that is just getting started, just doing it, taking that first step, and learning as you go. Part of it is being able to modify something without having to go, let's say my chicken coop. I put up my chicken coop before I had a ton of experience, and it's actually worked really well. There's a few things I would change. I could modify those things, and I have modified some of those things, and it's to the point where it's probably 90% of what I would do if I just built a chicken coop right now. Or I could get frustrated and I could tear the entire thing down because a few things weren't quite right. And I've seen that end of the spectrum where when something isn't quite perfect, people get really wrapped up in it. And so troubleshooting is actually one of the big skills that I try to teach people, where it's okay, so we've got this one issue. What are several ways to resolve it, and what are the pros and cons, short term and long term, of resolving it in each of those ways? And so if you approach a problem with that kind of troubleshooting, problem solving mindset, rather than, well, it didn't work, so I'm going to burn it down and do a new thing, or I'm just going to live with this thing that doesn't work. How do we make that? How do we moderate and kind of get in between those two in a way that works? And so that has saved a lot of people a lot of money, I think, at least. Um, and I think it's important to also, yeah, be careful not to be too cheap, to realize there's going to be cost involved. And I typically tell people, whatever you're going to work on, whatever you estimate it as being, at least for the first few years as you get used to how to do this, tack on an additional 100%. It's going to probably cost twice what you think it's going to cost. So that's a good rule of thumb until you've kind of gotten a feel for what do materials really cost and how valuable is my time and all of those things and factoring those in.
Yeah. What I know you mentioned already that you've made mistakes and you've seen other people make mistakes. Let's talk a little bit about some of the pitfalls, some of the obvious things that you did wrong and that you've seen others that just everyone makes the same mistakes, so that
Yeah,
we can just kind of put them out there. People can know what they're going to do, what they're going to fail at.
sure. Well, one of the mistakes that I see is people assuming that because they saw somebody do it somewhere else, that they can do it where they are. And a good example of that is here in Tennessee, we have certain rhizomial grasses, one of them being Bermuda grass, that gets into everything. So when I got on my property where I am in Tennessee, I thought I could plant, rows of berry bushes and and then I could just make basically mulch those and keep grasses and things out because elsewhere that works great. Well, when I did that here, all the rhizomial grasses came in from the sides. And
Hmm.
so one of the things that I learned is when I keep a garden, rather than doing like elongated strips of garden that I can maintain, I'm actually better off doing large squares because those large squares end up being, you've got the outside perimeter that the grasses can't get. Well, you have a lot less perimeter, just how physics or what is it, geometry works is when you do a large square instead of a long rectangle, you have a lot less edge. And so I have a lot less edge to maintain for that specific type of grass.
Yeah.
Well, up in Pennsylvania, you don't have to worry about Bermuda grass.
Hmm.
And so you could do those longer strips and it could work really well. So I guess what I'm getting at is one big mistake that I see is people will watch YouTube, which I highly encourage. Go do that, go do your research, but realize that there's going to be subtleties from one location to another as to what works well. That could also be true for slope. Somebody might really want swales, and maybe they've bought a piece of property or on a piece of property that the the slope of that property is too significant to put swales on, and so they do that, and then the swales just keep washing out.
Hmm.
So there's techniques and practices that are that really work well in certain circumstances, and understanding those is really important. Um, Other pitfalls are spending a ton of money on, like upfront on a whole bunch of stuff before you know what you're doing. So I like to try to encourage people to do it on the cheap for a little while to figure it out. That being said, fences are a something that you should put up before you get animals. So if you're going to get, say, sheep or cattle, you want to make sure you have good fences first. That's one of those things where you don't want to cheap out. So in some cases, you might consider fencing a smaller area and doing a few head of cattle or a few sheep to start out with, and growing your flock slowly just through reproduction of, say, those, a ram and two ewes. And so then you can build your system out over time,
Hmm.
and it's kind of a mix of those two, but of, spending too much at once or not spending what you need to. So there is some infrastructure that's really important, but there's also, I think, an important warning in not going too fast and too hard and buying too many things that you'll later realize weren't really useful for what you end up wanting to do.
Yeah. Your first example there resonates really strongly with me because we went through that. We had a small homestead a few years ago up in rural Nova Scotia, and we did exactly what you said. We were looking at things online, we were reading books, we were looking at magazines, and we had all these ideas and all these visions about beautiful things that we could do based on what we had seen. But nobody had written a guide to how Zara could homestead on that piece of property in Nova Scotia. There, half the things we tried just didn't work because that's not what this place was for.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes with experience, and that's kind of what I wanted to ask. So, we were on that property for over a decade, and every single year things got better because we learned what works, what doesn't work. But that,
Right.
you have to wait a year until you get to try it again. And you
Mm-hmm.
don't have that many opportunities to do that because time just runs out eventually. I could
Right.
make the same mistake 5 times, but then I'm in year 6 of doing my homestead, and time is running short. So I guess what are some of the things that I guess when we moved to our place, someone said the first thing you do before you plant any seed in the ground is talk to your neighbors about what works.
Mm-hmm.
That was partially true, partially not true. A lot of our neighbors didn't garden, or they also had very different experiences just down the road than we did where we were, because they had less
Right.
wind, or they were less exposed in different ways. What is your advice to clients when they're just getting started?
Yeah, well, I'd say to the extent that you can, let other people make the mistakes for you.
Hmm.
So in my case, I jokingly say occasionally, I've made that mistake for you already, because people will come in with ideas on things they want to do. And sometimes things that I've tried that didn't work on my property, to your point, will work on somebody else's locally because they have different set of scenarios. Local groups, like your people gave you the advice of talking to your neighbors. Well, maybe make that even a little more specific and talk to try to find natural farmers in the area, or try to find other homesteaders if you can find a homestead group or a mutual assistance group of people who are doing those things already, and take everything you get with a grain of salt. You have to start really using your own brain and thinking through, okay, this person told me that uh, that something won't work here, but is it actually because it doesn't work in Tennessee, or is it actually because it didn't work on their property, or it didn't work the way that they were doing it? So I guess balance all of those things. And every time you run across something that does or doesn't work, and you start hearing different people's opinions on it, start taking a mental note, start processing through that, start thinking about, okay, why did they say that? Not just take it at face value, because there's so many. I do a YouTube channel, and there is a lot of detractors, right? There's always people saying, oh, you can't do that, or that's not the right way, or I do it this way and it works so much better. And it's like, sometimes they're right for their area. Sometimes they're, correct in one means or another. And I try to be specific on my YouTube videos to say, here's the different things to consider when you're doing this, and here's why I chose this
Hmm.
based on these parameters. But yeah, being able to, again, interact with the physical world, understand how it responds, understand why it responds. I think another thing that I really have come to appreciate is being able to understand the mechanisms of action. So when we talk about what we've all been through COVID and all this stuff there, and one of the things that helped me understand what was going on with different, say, therapeutics, or yeah, we'll just leave it at therapeutics, was understanding what the mechanism of action was.
Hmm.
If you can boil down to how does it actually work, not some surface level, third grade explanation of how it works, but actually understand what are the intricacies of the things that are happening. For example, I don't feed my plants. Like, I don't feed my plants compost or nutrients, with some exceptions, but I'm feeding the soil. I'm increasing the life in the soil, and that life is actually doing its own thing. It's going to it if it's given the right stuff, it's going to become much healthier, and that life in the soil is actually what's feeding my plants. For example, if I have a pepper plant that needs a specific nutrient, it actually will put out a specific exudate that will encourage a specific microbe to create a specific exudate that goes back to the plant. And so there's this interchange in nature that happens, and knowing that that's how that works, rather, and that my pepper plant can actually that there's plenty of calcium, for example, in the soil for it, but I need the right microbes to be able to process it and hand it to my pepper plant, then I can actually increase my soil fertility rather than trying to constantly spray my pepper plants down with calcium or like, putting a whole bunch of money into these supplements from the store. I can actually do things for my soil that increase the life. And so understanding those mechanisms of action help me to do things in a way that make more sense, that cost less, that take less effort for me, and that are more resilient. So I'd say for people to really start looking at, why does the thing do the thing that it does, and how does it do it? And what you'll see is throughout nature, everything everything looks like something else. So everything rhymes essentially. And so once you understand how one thing works, it really helps you understand how the next thing works, and helps you to start see and recognize the patterns, so that you know different things that you're doing are much easier because you did something else, and it's now in your mind analogous to what you're doing now, and it really those having those tools really helps.
Hmm. Did you grow up on a farm or in this kind of environment? How different is this for you versus, let's say, your children?
Yeah. So I grew up on 7 acres. We did have some goats. That was pretty much it. They were pets. I think we had some chickens when I was pretty little, but for the most part, I had space to roam, and that's something I'm extremely grateful for. I had space to roam. I was given some freedom in doing things that weren't entirely safe, and learning how to be safe-ish while doing them. And there is a huge value in that. There's a huge value, like I said earlier, in learning that when I climb a tree, if I keep my feet close to the trunk and don't put them too far out on a branch, it doesn't break. Like, that's physics, but it's on a practical scale. And children learn through play. And so I learned through play. I learned through experimenting. I learned through breaking things and then fixing them. I learned because, we didn't really have a ton of money. So going out and buying a new bike from Walmart wasn't an option, but we had a lot of bike parts sitting around in one of our outbuildings. So I got to build bikes, and I got to realize why different parts didn't work well, and had a few crashes because of that. But so that's kind of how I grew up. So we did have a garden as well periodically, but I wouldn't consider it like a true homesteading, like we were trying to produce a lot of food or something like that.
Mhm.
So that is different for my kids. I was homeschooled, which again, I'm incredibly grateful for, because it really helped me be, be a thoughtful person as
Mhm.
opposed to following the system to get a score. So those things I'm really grateful, and are the same for my kids. I'd say we are a little bit more cautious about letting them do dangerous things, but there's still pretty little as well. Um, so we try to give safe environments to do things that are maybe more risky than other kids this day and age. But they don't have tablets. They don't have computers. They get to sit and watch YouTube with me a little bit periodically on specific chosen things. So and they're homeschooled. They get to be at home with my wife. So there are definitely some similarities, and there's definitely some things that I'm pulling forward from my experience. But I wouldn't say that I got to do the true like homesteading thing as far as producing a lot of food
Right.
and that as a kid. But my experience definitely lent themselves to doing what I do now.
There's a part of your journey that I want to go back to just as a follow-up question to this is,
Yeah.
for you was there was an awakening to a broken system,
Hmm.
a broken food system, a broken medical system, that an awakening to one break that led you to see the fissures in so many other systems. And many of our viewers will already be there, will already understand that, but they've already probably gone through their own awakening. As a parent, or potentially for some of our viewers as a grandparent, what can you do to help build some resilience in your children so they don't start thinking that things are a certain way and then have to go through their own traumatic awakening to realize that things weren't always as they seemed? Is that part of your um, homeschooling or your preparation for your children?
Yeah, I mean it's really just woven into what we do. So when I go and do a project, a lot of times I'm going to add some extra time because I realize that my kids are going to be a part of that. So I'm going to help them learn how to use tools or ask them, why are we doing it this way? What are some other ways we could do it? And so they're involved not just in the physical labor of it, but in the thinking through and being asked questions to kind of tease out, okay, why are we doing it this way? And periodically they'll have an idea and we'll just run with it because, it might be better than mine. It might be as good, or even if it's not quite as good, for them to be empowered to have say in what we're doing is valuable. So those are things that I do with my kids, but we really try to weave it into what we're doing. One of the things I feel is a big problem. Trying to think of how to say this. For a lot of the people I work with end up being kind of on the conservative Christian side, which in some ways describes where I'm at, not necessarily politically, but personally. And one of the things that I see is this idea of controlling your children, making sure that they do everything right, making sure that they sit still and quiet. And I guess you see that in general school and things as well. But I have a major issue with that. I don't think kids are supposed to be still and quiet. I don't expect my kids to never push back on what I tell them. I do expect them to be respectful to me and others and to each other. But one of the things that I use for designing systems is a design strategy or design science called permaculture. And one of the ideas with that is that you're creating resilient systems that as they mature, they become more able to function on their own with less input from us. And so typically you would think of that. I mean, let's use an example of the difference between a cornfield and a, let's say, silvopasture system. Well, a cornfield basically is you take a tractor through, you plow up the soil constantly every single year, at least once or twice a year. You plant the seed that you brought in from somewhere else, then you spray it down with chemicals. And some fields do pretty well with this for quite some time. So, somewhere in Minnesota that has a totally flat field, you can do that for a very long time and continue to get results. And maybe you have to put in a little more chemicals each year to get similar results, but you can basically do that forever. But you could also look at that same field and go, well, I could plant some trees, some mass trees, so nut trees, large fruit trees, in a decent pattern, and then I could also plant, what a lot of people would consider weeds, but basically a spattering of different herbaceous and bush type plants, and then I could run animals through that. And so now I can get a nut yield, I can get a berry yield, I can get an animal yield, and that soil becomes healthier and healthier. And eventually, if I wanted to, I could leave that system by itself and it would become its own ecosystem. Mm-hmm. And that this probably sounds like a weird way to explain it, but this is how I see raising children. That you might have that child who's really easy, who sits really still in church, who does all their homework and gets A's, and they get out on their own and they can't function because it's analogous to, tilling a field and planting corn year over year. It's not ready to be left on its own. It's worse off than where it started. And I think if we start thinking about designing our homes and our teaching methods around this idea that we would, I pull it from permaculture of we're looking at at our child individually as something that's a person who's incredibly beautiful and valuable, and trying to design how we interact with them in a way that will most propel them to being mature and able to function in the future. And I don't see that as, control is kind of the antithesis of that, if that makes sense.
That's beautiful. It's permaculture kids.
Yeah, exactly.
That's amazing. Um, I know that you've mentioned that a lot of your clients are in your area, and there's a kind of a growing homesteading almost movement happening locally or even regionally where you are. Do you have, or have you had discussions with others about parallel systems, about bartering, about kind of moving outside of the system?
Yeah, absolutely. So, um, there's a guy in Knoxville doing some really cool stuff. They do a system called the Agora, which is a PMA, or Private Members Association, which is basically entirely outside of the system. So they're using actual legal systems that we have in place to protect themselves, to be able to, believe it or not, just provide good food to people. So not only are they doing that, but they're doing classes. So I'll go and teach certain classes there periodically, and they're bringing in constant, like, everybody knows everyone. So, and you have to actually be a member to purchase things through their system. And so you can go there and purchase amazing meat. You can purchase items that don't have any seed oil in them, because they don't allow them, because it's their own private organization and they can do what they want.
Right.
So there's places like that which are incredibly encouraging. There's one of my big things is trying to create community. So I'll go to a lot of these homesteading groups and teach on various given topics to help people in their homesteading journey. And but I also am, connecting with all kinds of different people. So I'm actually personally working on a list that will be available to local quality small businesses and farms. So we'll have it broken down into different categories, like contractors, farm, food providers, all these different categories of people who are known, trusted, and local. And then there's some shops here that use gold backs. I'm not personally a fan of those, because I think you're paying extra for some, more than what the gold value of it is. But, it is a medium of exchange.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of people that I know who will take Lightning or Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies, as well as silver. And I've exchanged and interacted in all of these ways. I'll take pretty much anything other than, like Cash App or something like that as payment for the work that I do. I've even done trade. So a, a big part of what I'm doing is trying to be a connector. We've got a few other connectors in the area who are really good about, knowing different people and getting the right people connected to make sure that some of these alternative economies work. I think one of the traps is that people have this all or nothing idea of an alternate economy. And the reality is, it's just like homesteading, where you need to take a step at a time, a step towards different things. And there's some things where, you know, I forget the economist, but there's an economist who talks about like the magic of a pencil, and how just to make this pencil, that there's no one person who makes the pencil. It's,
Right.
it's a million or well, thousands of different people from different parts of the world collaborating, and then all those different processes eventually ending up in this incredibly simple pencil that we think nothing of. And every single thing that we use and have, including all of this technology that we're talking on right now, every last piece of it was made in various different factories by people who largely don't even know how it works.
Yeah.
So I guess the alternative economy is going to be similar to that, is in that we can remove ourselves to a certain extent, but we're always going to need to interact at some point in the standard economy with normal money. But
Hmm.
what I would say is that as we can, say, grow our own food, now we don't have to pay taxes on the income that we would have otherwise had to earn to buy that food. We don't
Right.
have to pay sales tax on that if you pay sales tax on your food in your area. We don't have to pay the all the middlemen and all the other people involved in producing it. We don't have to. Our money is no longer going to Monsanto, who's providing the seed and the spray. I don't think Monsanto exists anymore, but um, we're not feeding that system. We start to starve that system, but also if really hard economic times come, oftentimes the difference between surviving, completely falling on your face or surviving or even potentially thriving is oftentimes a fairly small percentage. And so
Hmm.
if you can make your home a bit more financially resilient, and a big part of that is food cost,
Hmm.
especially for us who try to eat well. I think you're putting yourself in a position of being much more resilient through those hard times. So, alternative economies are excellent, and I think to the extent that we can, we should be engaging in them. Um, some of my friends and I like to call it homestead drug deals, where it's like we don't nobody outside is invited unless you need to know them and trust them before you give them our information.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to deal with the potential of somebody deciding we're going to sue you over something, um, or whatever, bring in the FDA about something that I willfully transacted to buy this
Yeah.
thing, right? So I guess that's my answer about alternate economies here.
No, I think that's great. It's very exciting. Um, I wanted to ask you as we kind of come to a close, what are your plans for the Homestead Consultant in the next kind of coming months, in the next year or so? And also, at a larger level, we have a new incoming administration. We have this Make America Healthy Again movement. We're going into a period of significant global change. So, what do you see happening with your own business, and what do you see happening with the homesteading movement overall?
I think that as we see these political shifts and get excited about what could be, I think people have a tendency to pull back and go, okay, somebody else is taking care of it. I don't need to be so worried about it. And personally, I think that the next 4 years, if we don't have a massive, major economic shakeup, which I think is very likely for multiple reasons, it's a perfect time to get started, right?
Mhm.
Like it's a perfect time to if things are good and we think they're going to be good, well, it's a perfect time to start learning these skills before they're not good. Um, I've joked before and said I think our economy is much like, is it Wile E. Coyote? Um,
Mhm.
when he's chasing the roadrunner and he runs off the cliff and he doesn't realize he's off the cliff until he looks down. Um, and I think that's kind of where we are financially. We have so much debt, so many unfunded liabilities. It's going to require some type of default of some sort. And, the Fed has just pumped so much money into the economy that I think there's some very drastic corrections that need to happen. I don't know exactly what that's going to look like. I don't know how long they can kick the can down the road. So I would say start now so that you're not, I think so many people make excuses to never do something because it's never the perfect time.
Yeah.
And I think that we should be starting now with whatever is most important to us. And so that if, when hard times come, we're more ready to handle those.
I think that's great. Remind people how they can find you and learn more about you.
Sure. The is my website, and I've got links to some of my social media. I'm still working on that. Part of what I'm trying to do is put out more educational material. So I'll continue to put that information out on my social media. Um, the primary place that I have right now for people to go and see is YouTube. So it's, at youtube.com or at the Homestead Consultant on YouTube. If you just search me, you'll find my channel easily. But otherwise, on my website, I've got my phone number, my email. I'm easy to get a hold of. I'd love to talk to anybody who has questions. I love to connect with people who are trying to move towards a more resilient life. So if you are listening to this and want to talk, feel free to find my info at my website, thehomesteadconsultant.com.
Fantastic. Ryan, thank you so much for coming on and joining us. And I hope that we get a chance to collaborate more in the coming months. It would be great to maybe think about some workshops or some other work that we can do together.
Zara, thank you so much for having me on. It was really great to talk.
Thank you. My pleasure. As I said at the opening of this video, I am so glad to welcome all of our regular viewers back after a short hiatus that we had over the holiday season. If you're new to Collapse Life, please be sure to hit the subscribe button so you'll be notified of all our new content. You can definitely check us out and learn more about us at collapselife.com. You'll find all our regular blog posts there. You'll see our store, and you'll also be able to connect with us on our social media channels. Be sure to join us again next week for another episode of this Thinking Person's Guide to Civilization in Demise. Until then, don't forget, keep your chin up. It's only collapse. See you soon.